Are you confused about which skills to level? Not sure if you should be leveling Bellator's Shock Assault skill, Makatep's Adaptive Strategy skill, or Vindictus Fire of Absolution skill? Today we're going to go over some easy guidelines that will help you decide. The depth of overlapping systems in Tacticus is incredible and allow for such amazing strategic and tactical decision making. However, this comes at a cost of something called analysis paralysis, or in simple terms, there's too much going on, I don't know where to start, and I feel completely overwhelmed. And the skills were definitely something that I got stuck at early on in my career. Even though there are only 2 skills per character, one being a passive skill that is on all the time, and the other being an active skill that you can use tactically in a battle, with 73 characters released today and limited resources to share between them, that's a ton of choices to make. So today we're going to take a look at how do we categorize what's important in the skills, what are the best skills in the game currently per category, what are the best skills per mode, and then we'll make a nice summary of everything for you to take with you. I just want to mention again that as you begin your Tacticus career, it's really important to remember that there are no bad choices. There are only slightly more efficient choices than others, so whatever you do, make sure that your goal is having fun and enjoying the game. Ideally, you'll be making your own goals, your own priorities, in order to run your Tacticus career how you want. So let's dive in. So through my Tacticus career, I've put a lot of thought into which skills are important for me and for my characters, and to help me do that, I broke them down into a bunch of different categories as follows: healing and repairing skills, spawning skills, buffing skills, defensive skills, and damage skills. And so let's take a look at what each of these mean, and we can add in some examples from Tacticus. Healing and repairing skills, these are pretty much the simplest ones to explain. It's just any character that increases the health of another character with their skill. So an example here is Isabella's passive Medicus Ministorum that heals anyone near her that takes damage, and her active Rites of Restoration that heals everyone around her. For spawning skills, this is any that allow additional characters to be added onto the map, or to make those additional characters healthier, tougher, do more damage, or affect their traits. So for example, Archimatus' Incursion, which spawns characters around an enemy, and his passive Possession, which turns an enemy into a bloodletter once it's killed. With buffing skills, this is anyone that increases the damage of others. So for example, Eldrion's passive Doom increases everyone's damage on a target when he is 2 hexes away from the target. For defensive skills, this falls into 2 parts. Firstly, anyone that straight up reduces the damage taken in themselves or others. For example, Tyrant Guard's passive Guardian Organism, which reduces the amount of damage that someone takes. Secondly, it's the skills that reduce damage before it's applied. So for example, Calandus' passive Wireweave Net, which has a good chance to kill its attacker before it ever gets a chance to deal any damage, is also classed as a defensive skill. And finally, for damage skills, this is anything which increases the damage of a character. So for example, Ragnar's passive, Saga of the Warriorborn, which increases the number of hits and crit damage if he comes into contact with his enemy that turn. And of course, as always, there are some outliers and some weird skills that cross the boundaries of multiple categories, like Deathleaper's Feeder Tendrils, which actually heals, adds damage, and is a defensive skill because it suppresses the target. To keep things super simple, I've just stuck them in the category that I think it has the most impact on. So for Feeder Tendrils, I always see it as a healing skill as much as anything else. Okay, so now we understand the categories, let's take a look at the best skills in each of them. This isn't an exhaustive list of all the skills in the game, just the ones that are really good to prioritize early. In terms of how high to level them, I personally have most of these up to level 38 to 44. The only exceptions are Eldrion's Doom, which is level 50, and Maugan Ra's Inescapable Accuracy at level 47. It's really starting to get into marginal gains at that point anyway, and so you'll have to decide if it's worth it for you. I'll talk later in the video about how low I leave some skills as well if they're not a priority for me, so stay tuned. When we look at healing skills specifically, we're ideally looking for skills that heal everyone around you. This, alongside spawning skills, are the ones I prioritized early in my Tacticus career. There are 3 characters here that I especially paid attention to. The queen of healing in the game is easily Isabella. Both her active and passive skills heal people around you, and I've talked in many videos about the power of her battle ball when you surround her with tanky characters and they can just about survive anything being thrown at them. After that, Incisus and Nauseous Rotbone have nearly identical passive and active skills. Their actives heal everyone around them, and their passives revive fallen characters. And in fact, Incisus is actually the better character here because his revive brings everyone except mechanical characters back to life, whereas Rotbone only revives chaos characters. Looking at repairing skills, again it's another 3 characters to prioritise. Aleph Null's passive, the Fabricator Claw Array, repairs a mechanical character next to him for quite a large amount. And this skill single-handedly has won me so many legendary battles. It's so worth levelling. I stick him behind a leveled Revas, and the pair of them just do amazing things together. Next up is Makotep, whose passive repairs all mechanical units around him. It's not quite as good as Isabella's, as it only repairs damage at the end of the round, whereas Isabella's heals after every hit, but it's still very good at topping your characters back up if they do survive. Finally, there's a really good honorary mention for Actus. His active, Defend the Divine Work, repairs everyone around him, and although his passive isn't a purely healing skill, it will allow anyone that he repairs to attack again, which is pretty awesome when you combine that with his active, and so everybody that he repairs around him gets another attack. As mentioned, alongside healing and repairing skills, spawning skills is the other thing I've focused on leveling early. Because what is better than healing? Well, it's letting somebody else get punched in the face. And for this, it's pretty easy. Whoever can create a warm body on the battlefield, I prioritise those skills. So that includes all of the following: Bellator's active, Aleph Null's active, Anufet's active, Commissar Yarek's active, Castellan Creed's active and passive, Archimatos' active and passive, Snotflog is active and passive, Gibbascraps is active, Corodius is active, Shosil's passive, Revas is active, Abraxas is active, Celestine's passive, and Tangida's passive. And all of those characters are still being used by me on a very regular basis. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you may notice that Shadow Sun and Winged Prime are missing. Well, that's because even though they can add bodies to the battlefield, they're just not a priority in any mode specifically. They're good in places, but not to the same extent as any of the ones above, so I haven't leveled them. When it comes to buffing others, there are again some prime examples that really stand out over everyone else. Firstly, Eldrion's passive Doom buffs for an incredible amount, and this has seen him become the king of guild raids for quite some time. This was my first and only level 50 skill so far, and it really made a huge difference to my overall damage output in guild raids. Next up is another guild raid king, Ragnar. His active, Warhowl, buffs himself and all friendly characters that don't have a ranged attack. This does so much damage in that round and really increases your overall guild raid damage. It also really works well in Tournament Arena for deleting opponents. Another guild raid essential is Thaddeus Noble, and yep, you may be seeing a pattern here for buffing characters. His passive skill increases the damage by all the characters who use heavy weapons, so that includes any characters that look like snipers. So for example, Mogan Ra and Calandis. Marneus Calgar is another character that pops up a lot in guild raids, and that's because of his Rites of Battle passive skill. This increases adjacent friendly units' damage, and Imperials get even more damage. And finally, there's one more character that works well in guild raids, and that's Athana. Their Path of Command passive skill increases the crit chance and damage of all friendly units within 2 hex. As some of you that follow the channel regularly will know, Legendary Events is easily my favourite mode to play, and defensive skills are something I'm always keeping an eye out for. My absolute favourite defensive skill in the game is Tyrant Guard's passive Guardian Organism. It straight up reduces the amount of damage on all characters around you would take. I would recommend levelling this to at least level 36, as it increases the damage reduction to 33%, and that is a huge amount. A very close second is Brother Jaeger, whose passive, Martial Superiority, allows him to deal damage to the attacker first, and this is such a wonderfully satisfying skill. If you level him up high enough, he's simply gonna chop everything that attacks him in melee. Finally, a bit of an unknown one for most people is actually Janzar's passive. It reduces the damage they take and lowers the number of melee hits from adjacent attackers. If you pair Janzar up with Tyrant Guard, this reduction in damage gets quite high, and so they're a great pairing for piercing legendary event missions. And then this brings us to probably the most difficult category to discuss, which is damage skills. The reason that it's difficult to discuss is there's just so many options here, and some of it really depends on the rest of the team you're using. Again, I'm going to cover some of the ones I find really important and use regularly, but I think this is definitely a bit more flexible than the other categories. But we can start with my favourite active in the game, which is Marneus Calgar's Gauntlets of Ultramar. As he spins around, he deals a massive amount of bolter damage to all characters within 2 hexes, and because it hits all characters, it can really deal a load of damage very quickly. Similarly, Thaddeus Noble's active Basilisk Barrage is another multi-hit attack, although it has a bit more randomness than Calgar's. If you do hit though, it can easily delete a bunch of enemies depending on their toughness, and that is a wonderful feeling. If you want to play whack-a-mole with enemies, then Angrax's passive, Hateful Assault, is a lovely skill to level. Anyone that moves or spawns in next to him will get a serious smack round the face. This is great for Onslaught and legendary events especially. Sword Brother Godswold's passive, Champion of the Feast, is another one that packs a real punch, as he swings at nearby characters, not only hitting them for a big chunk of damage, but also reducing their armor, leaving them open to further attack in the next rounds. And the thing about this is that it's a free attack as he moves close to them. Morganraz's passive, Inescapable Accuracy, will increase your guild raid damage massively, especially when added alongside Thaddeus Noble's buffing skills. Revas's passive, Cyclic Ion Blaster, increases his own damage by quite a bit. And his active, Early Warning Override, is probably the most hated skill in the game because it not only adds more damage and spawns, but it also triggers a very deadly Overwatch. Ulf's passive, Savage Killer, is a wonderful skill for killing spawned characters, especially for those pesky scarabs that just won't stop multiplying. He just constantly swings his axe at summons going next to him, and also any character attempting to use an active themselves. Neurothrope's passive, Neuroparasite, infects an enemy, and then whenever they take further psychic damage, they become further infected and are dealt even more damage by Neurothrope. This really stacks up, and he can become a serious powerhouse. Exeter Rowe has recently seen his mechanical knees propelled into the meta, and his passive, Optimized Gate, really helps with this, because any time a mechanical character shoots an enemy that Exeter Rowe is next to, then Exeter will deal energy damage to that enemy, and this again can really stack up when you've got big mechanical multi-hitting characters. Finally, one of the newest members of Tacticus is Macer, and as he takes more damage himself, his passive increases the damage he outputs, so for every 10% of his maximum health he's missing, he deals more damage, and this can really stack up and do a lot of damage. And so that gives you a good starting point to some of the most powerful skills in the game. Did I miss any that you think are important? Let me know below. So now that we have a good categorization for each skill in the game, and an understanding of some of the best skills in the game, how do we go about prioritizing them per mode? Firstly, I want to say that I believe there's a different prioritization depending on your current goals in the game. If you haven't seen part 1 of my beginner's guide talking about how to level your characters, then I'd recommend you take a look after this video, as it'll help you understand what some of those goals are. But even without having done that, we can at least look into the modes in order of their importance to players at different stages. So let's begin with campaigns. Here you're really looking for survivability. Usually this will come in the form of upgrading your character's rarity to anything over Gold 2 for elite campaigns, but it can also come with leveling up certain skills. For this mode, I would prioritize spawning skills, healing skills, and repairing skills, with defensive skills pretty close behind those. Buffing and damage skills don't help you quite so much because you generally need to make sure you're surviving each battle rather than trying to max your damage output. The reason for maximizing your spawning skills is that they essentially work as an extra layer of meat shield for your characters when fighting the AI. The enemy AI will generally prioritize attacking other AI unless they're already in direct contact with one of your characters. For salvage runs, I like to take spawning characters as they run around collecting gold for me, but I also try and take characters that add crit chance percentage as well, just so that it makes it a bit easier to unlock the box with the Snotflogger shards in it. So for example, Morganraz's passive is a good one here. With onslaughts, early on I take damage skills like Angrax's passive, but eventually I transition into defensive or healing skills, and now I really run a lot of Tyrant Guard, Nauseous Rotbone, and Isabella. The deeper you get into onslaughts, the more difficult the enemies are. With Arena and Tournament Arena, I like to run damage, buffing, and spawning skills. You wait for the enemy to come to you, and then you blast them as hard as you can. It really depends on the team I'm running, but something like Celestine's Gemini Superior passive skill, or a combination of Ragnar's Wolf Howl, and then Onshi's active Inspired to Greatness, resetting it again, it can end up doing crazy damages. For character events where you have the little mini missions, it's a combination of healing and repairing skills mixed with spawning skills. This really helps a lot in that mode generally because it's usually trying to complete a little puzzle with a few moves without taking any damage. With legendary events, it's all about healing and repairing and defensive skills. Survivability is king. For guild raids, it's all about buffing and damage skills. You have 5 turns to do that absolute maximum damage you can. And finally for guild wars, defensively it's a lot of healing, repairing and spawning, while in attack it's actually a balance of everything, and it really depends more on who you're facing and what level they're at. Sometimes nuking down characters with a big overwatch is more important than sustaining yourself forever in an Isabella battle ball, but sometimes it's vice versa. In order to remember which skills you can prioritize, I've added some extra columns to my Google Planner spreadsheet. You can find find them in the Who You Own tab. They show you which skills to prioritize early and the categories I see them in. I've marked them as yes for the ones you should prioritize early, no for the ones that you should not prioritize early, and the maybe for the ones that you might want to prioritize just as you're getting into the game. So it's kind of like yes but later. And hopefully this will let you get a better understanding of everything. It's important that in this specific case, no doesn't necessarily mean don't touch the skill. There are some instances where you should be still considering it. For example, I have all the no's at least to level 8 because I sometimes play around with them for fun in salvage mode or campaign mode. Sometimes I'll even take the no's to level 26 if I'm using that character a lot in the rare category of the tournament arena battles. You might also just love the character, and so definitely don't hold back if you want this. It's really up to you. As we move forward, I'll talk about the skills of each new character that gets released in my Does This New Character Do Anything series, so make sure and hit that subscribe button. As always, there's a link in the description below to grab my Google Sheets planner for free, as well as a video explaining how to use it. And in the meantime, if you want to earn some free Blackstone to help you on your way, you can use my Referral Friend code in-game today to get 100 free Blackstone. Just note, you can only use one Referral Friend code, so make sure you make the most of it. So, as a summary, I'm going to say that if you're a brand new player, then the biggest impact you can have is to focus on healing, repairing, and spawning skills. These help immensely to get through the early campaigns, onslaughts, character events, and early legendary events. Later on, I would look into specialization, depending on where you want to go, and start pushing really deep into buffing and damage for guild raids and defense for legendary events or guild wars. And so now you should have a much better idea about how to level up your skills early on. If you want to see more beginner guides, then just check out my beginner guide playlist in the description below, and I'll see you very soon.